One of the most amazing skills that I possess is really just a gimmick, but I get almost all of my new students with this one. I'll say, hey, what song do you want to learn? They're like, well, have you ever heard of this song before? I'm like, no, I haven't, but I put it on YouTube, and then I listen to it for a couple minutes, and I go to the piano. I usually play a couple notes, and then I play their entire song for them. And they're like, what? You're magical. You're the best in the world. And I'm like, no, I've just done some ear training on some chord numbers. And so when I'm hearing the song, I'm hearing entirely different things than from what they're hearing. So they can't categorize songs the way that I can categorize them. In the same way that, like, if I look at a painting, like, that's just like a magical thing to me. I'm no good at painting. But for painters, they look at it like, oh yeah, well, he used this technique on this thing right here, and then he used a 2-point vanishing perspective. I don't know what I'm saying here, obviously, but they can categorize it all. Okay, I can use that technique and that technique, and they can pretty much kind of replicate the same thing. And I'm like, whoa, how in the world did you do that? That's gorgeous. That's magical. So there's nothing magical about it. It's just a matter of being able to look at something and break it down into its component parts instead of just taking the whole thing in. Most people, when they listen to a song, they're taking the whole thing in, and me, I'm just taking out little tiny nuggets. So, you know, I'll hear a song and I'll listen for 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll hear, you know, oh, 1, 5, 6, 4. Cool. Now I can play the song, and I sit down, and that's the only part that I've stored. Let's talk about what in the world 1, 5, 6, 4 means and how you can start to hear these chords. So without going into great detail here, because hopefully you've already encountered this in our other lessons about hearing melodies and things like that, each song is in a key. Well, let's use the key of C for right now. And when you hear notes of a song, you're not actually hearing the notes of the song. You're not hearing a C and a C and a D, G and a G and an A and an A and a G. You're really just hearing the relationships between the notes. So as long as I keep the relationships the same, then the song sounds the same. Trust me, we're getting to chords in a minute. So if I play for you, that still sounds like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, even though I used none of the same notes I used a second ago, just because I kept the relationships between the notes the same. So that's what literally 9,999 people out of 10,000 are hearing, is not the actual notes, but the relationships between the notes. Well, the same thing is going to be true of the chords. When you hear a chord, you're not really hearing a chord, you're hearing chords in relationship to each other. So once you can start to pull apart the relationships, then you can start listening for the relationships between them instead of the actual chords themselves, and you'll be able to pick up songs a lot faster. In the same way that if you can hear bump, 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 you can just hear the distances, then you can start on any note and play the song. That's Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. None of those 3 versions of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star used the same notes, but they kept the relationships the same. The song was the same. That's what we're going to do with the chords. Now, if that concept was new and confusing, then this next part's about to get a lot worse. So you need to probably leave this lesson and go check out some other lesson on ear training and keys and stuff before you get into this. But assuming that we can all agree that there are keys, we'll be in the key of C for right now, and that there are chords that we would expect to show up inside of the key of C, and there are chords that we would expect to not show up inside of the key of C because they break the rules of the key. The key of C is all white notes. This one is not in the key. This one is not in the key. As long as we can keep all the chords inside the key, then that just means there are 7 chords that we need to worry about. Really only 6, because no one really uses the 7 chord anyway. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we're back to this chord. So there's really 6 chords that I need to be able to identify as, hey, that was the 1 chord in the key, or hey, that was the 4 chord in the key, or that was the 5 chord in the key. Once I can start to do that, then I can just listen to a song and go, okay, went from the 1 to the 5 to the 6 to the 4. Cool, I'm ready to play it. Now I just need to know what key am I playing in. If I'm playing in the key of C, play the 1 chord, the 5 chord, the 6 chord, the 4 chord. Bam, I've got the song. Now I can just sit down and play it. So as I'm listening, I'm not listening for notes. I'm just listening for numbers or positions within the key. Don't let the number thing throw you. So if you'd rather think of this as, you know, home and one to the right of home and one to the left of home, or do and re and mi and fa. However you want to think of the positions here, numbers just seems the most logical for me. But we're talking about 6 different positions within the key, and the 1 chord is the easiest one to hear because it's going to be the one that as you're listening to the song, they hit the chord and you feel like, you know what, we could end the song right there and it would all be okay. We have a, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, that could be the ending spot. I know we're only 15 seconds in the song and we still probably have another 3.5 minutes of music, but that feel right there was the 1 chord. Now, as we're starting to do the ear training on this stuff, singing along is going to be a huge part, but you're not singing the melody. Again, you're not singing the melody. You have to ignore the melody entirely. It's only there to distract you and to mess you up. We're not listening for the melody. We're listening for 1 inside the key. So again, assuming that you can find the key from other lessons, once we're in the key of C, you can hear this, and you can hang on to that note. Then once we hit ba, we're singing the 1, even if you're not singing it well. And it feels like home, and it feels like the chord has finally come back to where you are, and you're resolved. That's the sound of the 1 chord. It's home base. It's probably where you're starting out the song. It's at least where you're ending the song. It's the home base for the whole thing. Now, we're going to cover the rest of the other 5 chords, but that would be a great place to start right there, is just turn on literally any pop music playlist from Spotify or YouTube or whatever media outlets exist as you're watching this, and just listen for where do you think the 1 chord is. Even if you don't get it right, there's no way for you to know at this point unless you submit a video of yourself or you make some kind of submission, get some feedback on it. Even if you don't find out if you're right or not, just listening for that and being aware that it exists and trying to identify it out in the real world is going to make you better at it. So you don't have to get it right. You just have to be paying attention to the fact that there is a 1 chord and we're trying to find out where it is. You're going to get better at hearing the 1 chord. Now, the 1 chord is the most obvious chord. Probably the second most obvious chord is going to be the 5 chord. It's going to be the 1 chord that most convincingly, most powerfully pushes you off of that 1. So you're going to be, again, singing that 1. We're singing this note. Now, once we get to this one right here, it's really hard to hang on to that 1 when the 5 chord is being played. This is the 5 chord right here, the G in the key of C. So if we're trying to sing that 1, go ahead and sing that 1 with me. We're kind of pushed down to this B automatically. It's really hard to hang on to that 1. So if you feel that like really strong urge to, I've got to move this note down, I can't hang out where I am because it sounds terrible, and a lot of people even drift down to that lower note without even recognizing they're doing it because it's just such a convincing push on that 5 chord. That's the push that you want to start recognizing instead of just like kind of drifting around and not knowing it. If you're hanging on to that 1 and you have to move down, or it sounds a lot better when you move down, that's your 5 chord. So again, there's more chords to come. You've got plenty of time to learn about the other chords in case these 2 are a challenge already. Just listening for, I'm going to try to sing the 1, and if I'm singing the 1 and it feels like home, it's probably the 1 chord. And if I'm trying to sing the 1 but I get forced down to the 7 or the note that's a half step below, then that's the 5 chord. And just listening for that in, you know, I've done it for tens or hundreds of thousands of songs now. So starting out with 20 or 30 songs wouldn't be ridiculous at all, even though it's going to take some time just when you're hearing music instead of just listening to the sounds coming into your ears and just, you know, taking the whole picture as a whole, trying to identify, all right, so where does it feel like home base is, and can I sing this? Am I listening to something that's the 1 or the 5, or do I not know? Or is it something that's definitely not the 1 or the 5, it's something else? This is a great start on ear training. I would say it's not even a start. That puts you ahead of 99.9% of the population right there, knowing that a 1 exists, knowing that a 5 exists, and being able to maybe identify some of them 20 or 30% of the time. That's great. The next chord that we're going to take a look at, though, is the 4 chord. Maybe you should have already stopped the video and come back to it 6 months later. So if that's the case, welcome back. I'm still the same age I was 6 months ago. And the 4 chord is the next one we're going to do. And that one is the chord where you can still sing the 1, but it really doesn't feel like you're home. Like you're singing the 1, but it just kind of feels like it's a fake home. Like there's a better, stronger home that you could go to. So again, we got the 1 chord, ba, we got the 5 chord, da. When I go to the 4 chord, I can go back up to the 1, ba, but it doesn't really feel like the song should end there. Ba, oh, that's the 1 chord right there. That's the resolution I was waiting for. I thought I was on the 1 chord because I could sing that 1 and it fit in really, really well. But once I hit that 1 chord, that was the real 1. So a 4 in my mind is just a fake 1. It's the one that most strongly takes the place of the 1, but doesn't really feel like home. You're not getting pushed down to that 7 like we were on the 5 chord. Bum. We can still go up to the 1. But then when we hit the 1 chord, it makes it obvious how fake the 4 chord was. Now this next chord seems like it should be really easy. We're going to go to the 6 chord. So far, we've only dealt with major chords. So the 1 chord is always a major chord. The 4 chord is always a major chord. The 5 chord is always a major chord. Now we're going to do the 6 chord. And it seems like that should be really obvious because if you hear a minor chord, it's probably a 6 chord. By the way, this is the same order of popularity of the chords within a song. So if you've been to any of our like song covering workshops or songwriting workshops, you know the 1 is the most common chord inside of a key. The 5 is the next most common chord inside of the key. The 4 chord is right behind the 5 chord, and the 6 is right behind the 1, 5, and 4. So the 6 is the next most common chord, and it's the only one that's minor. So it seems like, man, if you're hearing a minor chord, it's probably a 6 chord. And that's true. But the ability to identify a minor chord in context is more difficult than it seems like it should be, because we generally think of minor chords, oh, those are the sad chords. But sometimes you'll have a 4 chord that sounds really super sad, like the stuff we were just doing a second ago, or maybe it was 6 months ago for you, I don't know. We were singing the one, like that's kind of a melancholy feel right there. So while you're sitting on that one, your emotions might be kind of, well, that sounds like it's probably a minor chord. I can sing the 1, but it sure feels like it's unresolved and not happy at all. So these chords are not necessarily happy or sad, but the 6 chord is the only one we've done so far that actually is minor. And when you hear it and you know that it's the 6 chord, then it usually strikes you as, oh yeah, that one is definitely has that more minor characteristic than that one. That one is sad and melancholy, but doesn't have that same minor bite that the 6 chord does. So on the 6 chord, of course, you can still sing the 1 because the 1 is sitting right there in the middle of the chord. So we can still sing that C in the key of C, but it's got that feeling of sixness. Which is eventually how I want you to be able to describe all this stuff. Is it just feels like a 6. It just feels like I don't know, it just feels like a 1. In the same way that when a painter looks at a painting, they don't have to think, all right, let me list out all the different techniques they're used. They just look at it and it's, oh yeah, that's a watercolor. And they can just tell. And for me, I'm like, how come this thing's all washed out? Like, oh, well, it's technique you use over here. Oh, I wasn't thinking of it the same way. So eventually the 6 is just gonna have that 6-ness characteristic, but you're going to be able to sing the 1, and it's not going to feel like home. It has the characteristic that if it bumped up twice, which is a really common move, it would be at home. So if I went, so it's a lot closer to home than the 4 is. The 4, like, it needs to resolve kind of by a jump. It kind of has that like really heavy, like let down, like you're jumping off a step. And this 6 chord is just two little steps away from the 1. Or some people hear it in relationship to the 5. So they hear if I just went down 1, I'd be on the 5. It's minorish feel. And if I went down 1, I'd be on the 5. Now, let me warn you, again, the 4 chord kind of has the same thing. You could just go down 1 and be on the 5, but hopefully you heard in there that the bass movement was up. So the whole thing, even though I was singing a note and I came down, the whole thing kind of had that feeling of lifting up. We went 4 to the 5 to the 1. So that 6th chord, it's minor. It feels like it's only 2 steps away from bumping up to the 1. It feels like it's 1 step. If you went 1 step down, you'd be on the 5. And eventually, you just have to play enough of these and search for enough of these that the 6 just sounds like the 6. But it is the only minor one. That should be the biggest giveaway. Just be careful because major chords can sound minor depending on the context. You can't just go with happy and sad. They're a little bit more complex than that. And that just leaves us with the 2, the 3, and the 7, and these are the hardest ones to hear. Not really the 7, because the 7 sounds so weird. But it's almost pointless to do ear training on the 7 unless you're in an ear training class or you're transcribing a lot of jazz or classical, because you're not going to run into diminished chords just in regular life very frequently at all. So if you hear something that sounds really super freaky and weird, it's probably a diminished chord. I don't know. So that's the 7 chord. It wants to collapse in, by the way. When you hear a diminished chord, it should have that characteristic of really super unstable, kind of like the 5 chord, like it's definitely going somewhere, but it wants to just like fold in on itself. And maybe that's because of the way that it sounds, and maybe that's, I'm just describing it that way because that's actually what happens on the piano. It feels also like it's just kind of folding in on itself. So that's the 7 chord. It's the diminished chord. And if you think that you hear a 7, you're probably not hearing a 7. You're probably just hearing the bass player play a 7, and the chord is actually a 5. So if I'm listening to a pop song, it's not some jazz or classical tune, and I hear a 7 in the bass, and I definitely know it's a 7. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. I hear a 7 almost 100% of the time. I'm just going to automatically put a 5 in there. It's probably a 5 over 7 because that's how rare the actual 7 chord is. It just really doesn't show up in anything but jazz or classical. So if you think you hear a 7, you're probably hearing a 5. Don't use the 7, and you're going to be right almost 100% of the time. Now the 2 chord, we talked about the 4 chord, how the 4 chord is kind of like a fake 1. Like it has all the same characteristics, but it just doesn't have the strength, the power, the homeness, the oneness of the 1 chord. You can still sing that 1, but it's not really home yet. Well, the 2 is the next step removed from there. The 2 in my mind is just a fake 4. So the 4 right here is this. The 2 is right there. So couple different ways to listen for this one. You can hear it as like a minor version of a 4. It's like it has all the same characteristics of the 4, and this of course assumes that you are already proficient at listening for a 4 and that you've spent all that 6 months and that 30 songs and all that stuff, all your time listening, and 4s are no problem for you. Well, if you can already hear 4s, then 2s are just a fake version of the 4. And if you're like, wait a second, this is too many chords for me to eventually ever know, that's fine. You're not going to run into 2s that frequently anyway, so it's not going to be a big deal. If you just know your 1s, your 4s, your 5s, maybe your 6s, you're almost set. And then if it's not one of those chords, then just guess a 2, and if it's not that, then guess a 3. Don't worry, it's not going to be a 7. So you can leave the 2 and the 3 out entirely and just know that those are like your last options. If your other ones don't work, use a 2 or a 3. It's one of those 2. You're going to only mess up once, and it's definitely going to be the other one if it wasn't the first one. But if you want to listen for it, the 2 is a fake 4. Usually, it either wants to go to a 5. That's what it sounds like to me. The 2 is the minor version of the 4 that really wants to go, it's like 1 step removed from the 5, and then wants to go to the 1. The 5 wants to go to the 1. So the 2, 5, 1. That's what it sounds like to me. For other people, it sounds like one chord above the one, because it is. So the 2 chord, it's minor, and it might, in your head, want to go to the 1. You don't know yet if this is your first time listening for this stuff. You're like, oh yeah, that's definitely what it feels like. You're not actually going to know until you do a whole lot more listening. You have a relationship with the chords and stuff. So go into it listening for the 2, thinking, oh, I think this is the one that sounds like it wants to go to the 1, and then it might actually end up feeling like something else when it's out in the wild and in the context of all these songs you're going to listen to. But the 2, it also has the feeling of, in the same way that we did the 6, where it, in a lot of pop songs, it is just 2 steps away from the 1. 6 wants to go up to the 1. The 2 frequently is 2 steps away from the 4. So if I hear a 4 twice in a row, but they were both different 4s, like they both sounded like 4s, but there was movement in the middle, so I'm sure they weren't the same chord, but they both sure felt like 4s, then I know that one of them was a 2 and one of them was a 4. And if it feels like it kind of moved up or it lifted up, then I know the first one was a 2. If it feels like it got more and more dramatic, then the first one was a 4 and the second one was a 2. So it's a more dramatic version of 4. It's got the characteristic of 2-ness. So we got the 2 chord, which is a fake version of a 4, or the way that I'm hearing it, 2 wants to go to 5. Or you might hear it as a 2, that thing that's just like right next door to 1 and kind of wants to scooch down to 1. Or depending on the context, it'll sound like all 3. Our last chord is the 3 chord, the least frequently used chord, except for the 7, which never gets used. And the 3 chord has the same relationship to the 5 as the 2 has to the 4. So we said the 2 was like a fake version of 4 or a minor version of 4, or it's leading to the 4. The 3 has the same characteristic. 3 is like a minor 5. However, the way that it gets used in most pop music, it usually either steps up 1 step to the 4 or it jumps to the 6. So this thing right here, three to 6, or 3 to 4. So it's definitely minor. Like this one sounds more minor than the 6 one, because the 6 one usually gets mixed up in the mix of the 1, the 4, and the 5, and it can all be happy or it can all be sad. The 1 for the 4 and the 5 can sound sad if you mix it in the right way with the 6, or the 6 can sound happy if you're or the other ones can sound sad. So the 6 kind of gets just lumped in with those other ones, but the 3 almost always actually sounds legitimately minor. So again, those the context for those would be moving up to the 4. 1, 3, 4, or the same use. That's a 1 to the 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the 3 moving up to the 4. Or the other version is that's the 3 to the 6. Walking back up to the 1, 3, 6. Now, if this feels overwhelming, again, this is all of the chords that you're going to run into in any major song. So this is 98% of pop music out there is one of these 6 things. So you've got plenty of time to work on these. Again, just the 1, the 4, and the 5. 1, the 5, and the 4 are the ones that you need to work on first. And this 3 has that minor feel. It's the minor version of the 5. Or it's the chord that wants to bump up 1 to get to the 4, or it's the one that wants to leap. If you're hearing 2 minor chords back and forth, very frequently it's the 3 and the 6 that are going back and forth to each other. You hear a minor chord, and you're like, oh, that must be the 6, and then it switches to a minor chord. You're like, wait, that must be the 6. and then switches. Wait, no, that must be the 6. So if you're getting that feeling, you're probably going back and forth between the 3 and the 6. But again, it's hard to tell. You could also be listening to a 2 in there. There's a small chance that you're hearing a 2 and just not recognize it because of the context of it. So a lot of this is trial and error. That's why it's ear training, and that's why you got to go out there and practice this stuff. You don't have to get it right, but just knowing the different techniques, the different sounds that are out there, the characteristics of the 6 chords is going to go a long way to getting you to just being able to listen to a song, categorize it. I think I heard a 1. I think I heard a 5. That was either a 2 or a 4. I don't know. 1, 5, 2 or a 4, and then 1. And then at this point, we're just deciding, okay, well, I got to decide, was that a 2 or a 4 that I heard in there, instead of taking in the entire song and going, I don't know, it was some song in some key with some music and it sounded awesome. Now, of course, there are different websites, depending on when you're watching this, that are either used to exist or that are now just springing up, that are ear training things, and it'll help you to listen for these. But really the best place to listen for these is just out in the wild, where you would just hear music. Turn on your car radio, if those still exist, or whatever. Just listen to the normal songs you would listen to and just try to pick them out. Now, if you can go to your piano, find out what key you're in, which is, again, its own lesson, but find out what key you're in, and then find the 1 and try to sing that 1 and actually find out what the chords are. That is definitely the best assignment that's going to get these things moving as quickly as possible and get them identified as quickly as possible. You'll start to recognize, oh, I didn't expect that was a 6 chord because I thought it was a 4 chord, but I can see in this context, and playing through it, all of that stuff, and just identifying it as you go, that's going to get your ear trained up as quickly as possible. And the last point is, there's just 6 chords. So if you're going to transcribe a song, you don't have to know at all any of the characteristics of any of the chords. You don't have to know what the 5 chord sounds like or the 4 chord, because you're going to guess a chord that's in the key. And if that's wrong, you're going to guess again, and then you're going to guess again, and then you're going to guess again, and then you're going to guess again, and you probably already hit it. But if you didn't get it already, you're going to guess the last chord that you didn't guess yet, and you're going to get it right. So you're only going to mess up 5 times in guessing any particular chord in the song. So get out there, try these chords. As long as you're staying inside the key, you can only mess up so much. And if you run into something that you think is an exception, definitely send it along to me and say, what in the world is this chord? You said you covered all of them, but you lied. And I'll walk you through any of that. Good luck. Have fun.